Hello. So my name is Tim Myers. I am with Tsunati, and we're excited today to talk about Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. So I'm going to give you an overview of the product. I'm going to do this through video expression. So this will be something that you can kind of refer back to. Oftentimes when we have these meetings, we say, hey, can we record that meeting? And so I'm going to proactively do that for you here, walk you through what I have set up in the lab, just kind of give you some brief introduction and overview to the product. Okay, so before we jump into the lab, I want to just walk with you through the four most common deployment scenarios that you're going to run into. And what we're doing here is Veeam Recovery Orchestrator is a orchestration and automation engine, and it's going to orchestrate tasks that can be performed using the Power CLI library and all things PowerShell for Veeam backup and replication. It's going to categorize objects and resource groups and a variety of different entities using Veeam One's kind of business view functionality. And what that's going to ultimately wrap up to is your ability to have these automated recovery plans, whether you're recovering a virtual machine, whether you're failing over a replicated virtual machine. Those are probably the two most common scenarios. And a third opportunity is going to be for you to be able to recover to the cloud. And so as we look at these four kind of categories that are here on the screen, the most common one that we're going to run into is I've backed up a virtual machine or a set of virtual machines that could comprise of one or more applications, and I need to be able to restore them. And so I need to make a decision at that point of where am I going to restore them to? And that could be restoring them back to their original location. It could be restoring them back to the primary site, but a different host or a different cluster. It could be backing up a Veeam agent of a physical machine and being able to restore that back into a VMware virtual machine. Or it could be recovering a virtual machine or an agent backup to another physical location, think DR site. So, backup and recovery. As long as there is an existing backup job that exists inside of Veeam backup and replication, then Veeam Recovery Orchestrator can create a orchestrated recovery plan that's going to allow you to restore those backups back to the locations that we just talked about. Same site, same site, different location, or different site, and obviously that's a different location. The second use case is going to be Veeam replication. And so Veeam replication has been part of Veeam's core backup and replication product for a long time. And that's going to be where you're looking at that 15-minute RPO recovery period. So, up to that 15-minute period, you're going to use Veeam replication, which is basically doing virtual machine replication orchestrated right by Veeam backup and replication. And usually that's going to be from your primary location to your disaster recovery site. So, in the event of an unexpected outage, a site outage, or whatever that business continuity event is that's going to dictate that you now need to declare a disaster and fail that virtual machine workload over to the DR location, that's going to be the second type of recovery plan or deployment scenario that we can talk about. And that's going to be a Veeam replica failover plan. Now, if you're familiar with version 11 of Veeam Backup and Replication, that's when they introduced continuous data protection, or you'll hear a lot of people call that CDP. And so CDP is non snapshot based replication. So it doesn't use vSphere snapshots the way that traditional Veeam replication does, but it allows you to have near second RPO replicating from your primary site to your disaster recovery location. Now, there are some scenarios where you may want to do high availability in the same location, and maybe you're replicating from cluster to cluster. But for the purposes of this conversation, again, this involves continuous data protection or that CDP functionality and the ability to orchestrate and automate a CDP replica recovery plan. So far we've talked about three different types of recovery plans. We've talked about a virtual machine recovery plan, or that can also include Veeam agents. We've talked about a replica recovery plan, which is based on traditional Veeam replication. And the third type that we just talked about is the CDP replica recovery plan. The fourth one is going to be recover to cloud. So in this version, version 7, it was also available in version 6. of Veeam Recovery Orchestrator is the ability to orchestrate and automate recovery of Veeam agents and VMware virtual machines to Microsoft Azure, and using Microsoft Azure as that recovery destination or DR location. And so now we've talked about those four primary deployment scenarios that you can use, whether I'm restoring to vSphere, whether I'm failing over, right, from a replica standpoint, I'm failing over from a CDP replica standpoint. And if I want to restore instead of restoring to vSphere, that I want to be able to restore to Azure. So again, from a product overview standpoint, these are the four most common deployment scenarios that are built-in, wizard-driven, that are going to give you different flexibility in terms of being able to achieve that level of high availability and automated recovery. Now, if we dive into capabilities for a moment, I want to talk to you about the variety of different use cases. We talked about the deployment scenarios, and now what I want to do is I want to talk about the different capabilities that are available in this product. So, one of the things that this product offers is the ability to do on demand or scheduled disaster recovery testing of those recovery plans that we talked about. And so, whether that is testing for the ability to verify the fact that you can recover, right? That is one option. Maybe you want to stand up a instant test lab to be able to do some patch testing. Microsoft Patch Tuesday is a perfect example of that. Maybe there's a new software upgrade that has come out, and you want to be able to stand up one of a test lab from the most recent backup that you've done, and that way you've got as close to production as possible to be able to have confidence that if you were to apply this patch in production or apply this software upgrade to your production environment, that it's going to work as expected. And so, even though we spend a lot of time talking about orchestrated disaster recovery, the product name being Recovery Orchestrator, there is a use case for testing. And a lot of times that's disaster recovery testing. But if you think about it, if you were to patch your production workload and it was to go offline and you weren't able to recover that, that could arguably be considered to be a disaster as well. So, what are some of the other things? Can I back up a machine with an agent? I know we talked about that earlier in the deployment scenario. And can I be able to recover that? Well, agent recovery is another one of those capabilities that we talk about, and we can test that as well. So can I test the fact that if I've backed this up, that I can recover and restore to a VMware virtual machine environment? Yes, we can. Do we want to be able to limit the scope of users that are available on this platform? Well, sure we do. So we've got our general administrator that can do all things on the platform. And then we've got what we call a plan author that can create and administer the recovery plans. And then we've got the plan operator, where we don't want them to actually make any of the plan decisions. We just want them to be able to execute the plan at that time that the disaster is called. We've got other things where we want to be able to do things like application verification. And I say that that's a very generic term, and it can be a very, very specific applicable use case. And my example to you would be, can I power on the virtual machine from the backup? Yes, I can. So in some ways, that could be the minimum use case for application verification. But this product can take it a step further. Can the VMware tools start? Do I receive a VM heartbeat? Is it available on the network, and can I ping its network interface? Are there certain services that are running on the guest operating system that I need to see are able to start and put into a running state? Are there certain services that need to be verified in whatever the use case may be? I want you to see that you do have a level of um, verification, right, from a very beginning of can I power on that virtual machine to a very, very specific use case that says, can I power on the virtual machine and accomplish these 4 or 5 or 6 different steps that will meet my criteria for having confidence that I can actually verify that that application will come up in that disaster recovery scenario. There is this idea of dynamic documentation. You'll find that the reporting and the documentation that Veeam Recovery Orchestrator automatically creates for you is very, very powerful, whether it is the readiness of an infrastructure to be able to do your DR testing, whether it's you're executing a disaster recovery plan and you need to be able to see all the different steps that were executed as part of that test, the version of software that was running, the time and date stamps, the exit codes from any scripts that were run. All of that documentation is going to be captured for you dynamically and automatically. And whether you're looking for that in a summary report, whether you're looking for that in a detailed report, and whether you want to generate that documentation on demand or you want it to automatically be scheduled and run and delivered to an email inbox at a regularly scheduled time, all of that is built into the product. So I hope that just kind of, again, gives you a little overview of what you can do here. You can have dynamic documentation, you can have scheduled events that take place. You can do instant on demand testing. You can have scheduled testing that happens, that one click recovery, the different types of role based access control. You're going to find that this is a very, very easy product to consume that has a huge benefit to your organization. And we're excited to kind of share that with you and help you see the benefits of standardizing around Veeam Recovery Orchestrator as we move forward. So with that being said, let's jump into the actual user interface. Let me walk you through a little bit of what the product actually looks like when it's deployed. Okay, guys, so here we are in the lab environment, and the very first thing that I want you to see is kind of it's a HTML5 based user interface. Everything that you do inside of Recovery Orchestrator will always be done from within the confines of a web browser. Now, whether that's Firefox or Chrome or your favorite web browser of choice, that's entirely up to you. But what you'll see on the desktop of this machine is an icon. And that icon will just open up this web browser for you. It's going to simply be a secure HTTPS URL that you'll use, and it's going to be port 9898. And you'll get to your login information, authenticate as your user, local user, domain user, etc. And then this is the spot where we're going to land, right? So welcome to the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator dashboard. Now, here at the dashboard, right out of the gate, there's a number of different things that you can see here. The first thing is going to be plan execution, and you can see if there are any plans that are currently running and being executed. You can see something that is called a plan readiness check. And so what that means is, are all of the requirements that are needed in order for you to be able to successfully execute and run a recovery plan, have they been verified and are they ready to go? Now, as some examples here, right? Obviously, I've got some things that are good, meaning they're green, they're ready to go. And I've also got some failures here just to kind of show you a little bit of what this looks like. So from a readiness check perspective, you can see that 4 of 4 means that I have 4 different recovery plans. 3 of them have passed, and 1 of them is not ready for execution. So something in the environment, those prerequisites that are going to be needed for the successful execution of this plan are not ready, have not been able to be verified. And so it's giving you that information here, kind of as the recovery orchestrator administrator when you log in, that there's something here that kind of needs to be addressed. Now, from a testing perspective, a lot of the way that Veeam Recovery Orchestrator functions is by orchestrating components of remote Veeam backup and replication servers that it's able to manage. And the DR testing that Recovery Orchestrator is able to perform is done by something, the concept called data labs. Now, if you've been around Veeam backup and replication for any period of time, you know data labs is this concept of being able to power on a virtual lab alongside of a application group. And the application group is some sort of a third-party dependency that that application is going to need in order to be able to function. So, some people will look at that under the concept of maybe they're familiar with Sure Backup. Data Labs is a different concept that sounds similar, but is really it's fundamentally based on the virtual lab technology, which is mounting that backup as a virtual machine in VMware, powering that backup on from that vPower NFS, right, location, and then you being able to do some level of testing or verification of that backup through the lens of an active powered on virtual machine. And all of any of the changes that you would make as part of that are stored into a redo log, right, into a secondary file. And the moment that you power that off, then those changes are destroyed. So from a data lab testing, I want you to think about data lab testing equals DR testing, right? Whatever type of recovery plan testing that I want to do is going to be represented here by this concept of data lab testing. So in this example, I've tested one of the 4 recovery plans that are available, and one of them is passed, and there's still tests that are required for the other 3 to achieve that level of recovery verification. The next thing that you're going to see here are plans by RPO, recovery point objective. And it's going to give you the plan names. You can kind of see these. And if the if the RPO has been achieved, you'll see what that looks like here. And then you'll see what the target is. So this is a great way to come in here and say, well, I can see that Apple 1 replica recovery has a target RPO of 7 days, but I've been able to achieve that in 9 minutes and 46 seconds. I'm well below that threshold. Now, for this 1 hour RTO, 24-hour RPO multi app recovery plan, you can see that the target RPO is 1 day, but it's got a restore point that's missing. So it's unable to be able to achieve that RPO. And as we move on over here to the right-hand side, you can see that there are the top plans by the time objective. And so those same plans that are here are basically saying, well, you need to perform a test in order to give us the information that we need in order to be able to let you know if you can reach this target RPO. So testing, critical component of this. Can you achieve the RPO? I don't know. Let me test it. Once I test it, I'll get the information that I need and I can come back and let you know whether or not I can achieve that target RPO. So just like it says here that there are 3 of these that need to be tested, notice up here you can see test required is 3. So again, there's a little correlation there again between this concept of data lab testing and whether or not we're actually able to successfully achieve our target recovery time objective. And then finally, if there's any issues, you'll be able to see what some of those issues look like down here. Now, there's currently nothing that's running. There are no issues that have been identified, so this area is blank. But this is all information that you get just from this dashboard. Now, another thing that I want to point out is obviously up here on the right-hand side at the top, you can see who the user is that's logged in. You can see the role that they have. I'm clearly logged in as an administrator here. If you need to do some level of administration, some customization of the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator server itself, then you're going to come over here to this administration section, and we'll get to that in a moment. But from here, each one of these areas, plan execution, plan readiness check, data lab testing, all of these have that dynamic documentation, that reporting that I talked to you about earlier. And you can see that each one of these has this blue hyperlink that will take me ultimately down here to this reporting area here on the bottom left-hand side. So if I was just to drop down here briefly, you can see that it's going to show me all of the documentation that I have available to me, and if I have any email subscriptions that are available, or whether I have any templates that need to be logged in. I've given it just a second here for it to log me out. But if I keep going, um, the dynamic documentation is always going to be found here under this reports section. So if you have a particular plan, you can type in that plan name here. You can see the various types of plans here under sorting by report type. You can see that there's a plan definition report. Plan definition report is going to tell you all of those decisions that you make during the creation of a recovery plan. And so anytime you need to be able to see that, you can click on that and you can download it. Okay. If you want to select multiple plan definitions, you can select multiple ones and you can come up here and you can click on download. Now, notice when I click on download, I have 2 different choices. Do I want just the summary or do I want the full report? So, depending on the level of detail that you're looking for, you'll choose this option that's the most appropriate for you. Now, quick little tip, if you just click on it, it's always going to give you the summary report. And it's also going to let you know that if you want the full detail, actually check the box and then click on download and click on full report. And that's going to give you all that information. So I have a plan definition, I have an execution report. So every time this report gets run, as though you're declaring a disaster or feel the need to perform that orchestrated recovery event, a non test, but a real event, you're going to see this execution report. Same rules apply. I can download any of these execution reports. As I scroll down a little bit further, you're going to see something called a readiness check. And the readiness check is going to be, is the environment appropriately configured? And are you declaring that you are ready to be able to fail over? Now, in order to verify the readiness check, it also requires that you do a test. Remember, we talked about that DR testing. So there's a couple different requirements there to give you that confidence in knowing, is it configured correctly? Have you tested it? And therefore, you've now verified the fact that you're able to fail over or orchestrate a particular recovery plan with confidence. Now, moving over, you're going to see what the operation was. You're going to see the scope. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. You're going to get to see the result of those different reports that have run, whether they were success or halted or failure, if there was a warning, and then obviously the date and time that that report was run. So that's going to be all about this reporting piece. Very, very powerful. Very, very powerful. Technical people never like doing documentation. So this reporting piece is really going to be your friend. Now, as I jump back up here to the dashboard, as we move on, the next thing that you want to look at is kind of the core piece of this is going to be those recovery plans. Okay, you'll be able to see here the different types of recovery plans that are available, their names. They're always going to be disabled by default when they get created. So whether it's been enabled or disabled is going to determine whether this recovery plan is live and I'm actually able to allow or authorize a plan operator to then execute this recovery plan in the event that a disaster or a need for orchestration has been identified. You can see here if it needs to be verified what the state of that looks like. Again, scope, let me talk to you real quick about scope. So multiple applications, okay? Maybe you don't want a group of plan administrators or plan operators, authors or operators to be able to access or see all the different recovery plans for different applications inside your organizations. And I'll use an example of Exchange, right? That's a common application. I know many people have moved to Microsoft 365, but you're familiar with what an Exchange server is. So if you had an Exchange server deployment on premises and you had a group of people that wanted to be able to administer the plan for a orchestrated recovery or failover of Exchange, then you could create an Exchange scope and you could take all the resources and all of the access and be able to place that inside of the Exchange scope. And therefore, when people log in with those credentials, they would only be able to see the information pertinent to Exchange and not all the other plans that you have, not all the other applications that you have protected. It's just another mechanism of role based access control as defined kind of here in Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. So I hope that makes sense. It gives you a little bit more clarity around what scope is. You're going to see default scope by default, right? And what that means is that every application, until you create another scope, is going to land in that default scope bucket. But that's what scope means. You're going to get to see if it's been tested and what the results of that test was. You can see here for this Web 01 recovery that the last test was done on the 23rd and it passed. You can see that the readiness check was done on the 23rd and it passed. And then you can see what we call a recovery location. Now, recovery location is nothing more than where you're recovering to. There are some requirements. We could talk about that, in more detail as we kind of get forward. Okay, so data labs is going to be those virtual labs that you use to be able to do that DR testing. Those are assigned to a scope. You're going to have a lab calendar. You can see where you can log in and go in and see, are there different virtual labs or data labs that are available here on the lab calendar? Do you have any automated testing that's occurring? You can see here I've got a scheduled test that happens automatically for Web 01 recovery that's here on the 23rd. So you've got different things that you can do just by creating a schedule and deciding what scope, what plan, what are you trying to do, and when and how often. And so that's just a good level of visibility here of where you can see that. If you are doing any of the testing, you're going to see the different data labs that are created here, those virtual labs that have been identified on your Veeam backup and replication server. You can come to any one of these and you could actually run this from here and power that data lab on if you wanted to do any type of on-demand or instant test lab. So again, just from an overall dashboard perspective, you can see all the things that you get here, whether it's checking on plan execution or readiness or data lab testing, the top plans by issues, whether RPO or RTO, you can see the recovery plans, and this is kind of where you would come to be able to create recovery plans, modify recovery plans, identify the steps of a recovery plan, test a recovery plan, download and view any documentation for a particular recovery plan. It all kind of happens here from this recovery plan location. So as I mentioned to you earlier, There were a bunch of different options that are available here as you kind of walk through this wizard driven approach to orchestration and recovery. And you can see that when you just get here to plan type, these are the different plan types that are available. We talked about a majority of these in that deployment scenarios earlier. Cloud, again, that means a Veeam agent or a VMware vSphere VM that's being recovered to Microsoft Azure. CDP replica, a Veeam replica. There is some storage integration here. If I'm using NetApp or I'm using HPE and I have storage integrated at the Veeam backup and replication level, and I'm able to control those snapshots, you can see here as I select storage and go next that there is ONTAP and HPE integration here. But primarily, people are they're backing up and they're restoring. They're doing virtual machine failover with replicas. For their tier 0 or their tier 1 apps, they're doing CDP replica failover to that disaster recovery location. There are some instances where people are looking at recovery to Microsoft Azure, and that's really where the variety of different use cases stem from here in the product. The last place that I'll take you is just a little back-end administration here. You can see when I come to administration, it's just going to give me another dashboard that's kind of a high level overview of where do things currently sit. You'll notice this term here called orchestration agents. So the only thing that I want you to recognize is that in order for Veeam Recovery Orchestrator to orchestrate any actions on a remote Veeam backup and replication server, it just needs to deploy this orchestrator agent on that Veeam backup and replication server so that it can communicate with it, obviously orchestrate those remote actions that are happening. And this is just going to tell you how many different ones have been deployed? Are they healthy? What's the current status? Obviously, this product is designed heavily to work with a VMware virtual infrastructure environment. You're going to connect to a vCenter as the primary integration point to be able to administer and communicate with the virtual infrastructure. So you're getting that level of information here. If you were integrated with HPE or NetApp, you would see that information here. License information, how many different data stores are part of storage plans. Those storage plans arise from that storage integration, again, HPE or NetApp. And then you can see, have I set up any Azure destinations? Do I have some VMware recovery locations and storage locations, right? So you get all this kind of from this overview place. There is this new piece called Threat Center. Now we're going to talk about Threat Center later, but this is brand new in the 12.1 deployment here of Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. This pulls information directly from Veeam One to really kind of give you this advanced look and purview from a best practices perspective about the infrastructure that you're managing. Has it detected any type of potential malware detection? Are there anomalies that exist in the environment that we want to bring to your attention? How are you doing from an SLA compliance perspective? And it's going to assimilate this score to kind of tell you, are you following Veeam and best practices? The more best practices that you follow, the more secure your environment is, the better job you're doing at protecting your data, right, by using things such as immutability and the 32110 rule and so on and so forth. Obviously, the higher this score is going to be, and it's going to give you all the information here, just kind of at a glance. That you would want to see that would be pertinent to that conversation. Coming down here, clicking on this configuration is going to pop you over into the embedded VM1 server that is deployed alongside of Veeam Recovery Orchestrator when you install the product. And that's where you would do any additional configuration that would be necessary. Again, we talked about the orchestrator agents as being the mechanism to be able to communicate and orchestrate those actions on the remote Veeam backup and replication servers. And that's where you're going to get that from. I'm clearly talking too much because it's logged me out yet again. But I want you guys to have this overview because I think this is important, right? For you to see and understand what this looks like, at least from a 15-minute high level overview perspective before we jump right into it. So you have at least this initial understanding and expectation as we jump in. Now, we're going to connect those orchestrator agents again to our Veeam backup and replication servers. If you're using Enterprise Manager, you can connect to Enterprise Manager as the source. It would automatically deploy these agents to all the Veeam backup and replication servers that are being managed by that Veeam Enterprise Manager server. From a VMware standpoint, again, we're connecting to a vCenter server. That's our target. So if you have multiple locations that are being managed by multiple vCenters, we're going to add all of those in here and make sure that Veeam Recovery Orchestrator is able to communicate with all of them. If we have storage, again, HPE NetApp, we're going to integrate that here. You would see that integration here if it was present. And then our final piece of integration here is just going to be a mail server, whether that's an SMTP server in your environment, if you're using Microsoft 365 or a third-party service, so that when Veeam Recovery Orchestrator sends out those automated emails, whether it's the readiness check or the documentation or the execution report or any of those other types of dynamic documentation that it creates, that it can use this SMTP server as the basis to be able to send that email communication to you. Then we're going to go through and look at different recovery locations. Again, where are we recovering or failing over to? We're going to add those in here. We're going to look at the individual steps that are available that we can use and consume as part of our recovery plan creation. There's a number of different steps that are in here by default. Different credentials that we need to access different parts and pieces inside of the infrastructure, whether that's our single sign-on for vCenter, information that we need to be able to communicate with Azure, local administrator or third-party administrator access for our Veeam backup and replication servers. Just the different credentials that we would need are stored in here. Those data labs that have to be created on the Veeam backup and replication side, and then assigned to the appropriate scope here in the Recovery Orchestrator interface before they can actually be consumed and used and configured. And then we've just got a variety of different settings, the name of the server, contact information, and default report retention times for the number of reports that you would want to keep, as well as kind of, user interface and activity timeouts. That's all kind of here in the settings. And then we jump down into permissions. So we talked about those scopes, right? Those different containers, if you will, of specific applications that we would want to limit exposure to from a plan author and a plan operator and a resource requirement consumption for those scopes. Those would all be defined at a high level here based on scope. Roles, we've kind of talked about those roles, adding the user, assigning the role, putting it in the appropriate scope. Inventory. So, inventory is going to be a few different things here. We're going to have this concept of groups. And so, what are the different resource groups that we want to be able to protect? We're going to have recovery locations where are we failing over to. We're going to have those plan steps. And maybe we come up with specific steps that we only want to have available to specific scopes so we can limit a plan step to a particular scope. We can have the credentials, all those credentials, and maybe certain credentials are only appropriate and should only be visible and consumed by certain applications that are limited to certain scopes. And then finally, we have this idea of a template job. And the template job is going to be, here's my example. So I fail over a virtual machine to a different Veeam backup and replication server in a different location, in a different vCenter, in a different virtual infrastructure. Once that virtual machine has been failed over, it now is considered to be production. It needs to be automatically re-protected by a Veeam backup and replication job because it is now, it will contain sensitive production data that you need to make sure you protect. So the idea here of a template job is that these are pre-created jobs that are going to be modified at the time of use so that when that failover or that recovery happens, it will use this template as the basis for a new Veeam backup and replication job to provide that level of automatic protection for that recovered workload, right? So that's a little bit there on template jobs. Finally, you've got licensing. If you needed to create log information, be able to upload to Veeam support for any specific reason, you would do that down here. And then finally, just kind of the about section that'll tell you all the information about the orchestrator server, the web user interface, the embedded version of Veeam backup and replication, Veeam 1, and then finally the orchestrator REST API. So, guys, that's it. It's a little bit detailed, but I wanted to make sure that even though we're talking about an overview of Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, that it was detailed enough to kind of give you a sense of what to expect. So, I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to kind of walk through this Veeam Recovery Orchestrator product overview with you.